In the forgotten hills of Arkansas, where no one could hear the screams behind old wooden walls, Eliza May had become a ghost of herself, trapped in silence, bruised by the hands of a man once called a hero. But one stormy night, as thunder cracked and fists clenched, it wasn't a neighbor or a sheriff who saved her. It was Thunder, a wild Mustang no one believed in, who shattered through the door like justice on hooves. And in that moment, everything changed. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The wind had a bitter edge that morning in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, clawing its way through the dense thicket of pine trees that surrounded the Harlan cabin. The sky was a smothered gray, thick with low clouds, and the scent of damp earth lingered in the air. The cabin stood alone at the edge of the forest, its wooden slats weathered and darkened with age, as if even the structure itself had absorbed the silence that filled its rooms. Inside, Eliza May Harlan, 32 years old, moved like a whisper between the kitchen and the living room. She was a slender woman, just above average height, with long auburn hair often tied into a low braid that brushed the middle of her back. Her eyes, once a lively hazel that caught sunlight like honey, had dulled into something quieter, almost faded. She had once been vibrant, a muralist known for painting abandoned buildings with scenes of hope, but now her color was hidden beneath layers of fear. Eliza was the kind of woman who preferred tea to coffee, oils to acrylics, and silence over confrontation. But what had once been quiet strength had become something else: resignation. She no longer hummed to herself in the mornings, nor wrote poetry in the margins of sketchbooks. Her spirit was thin, stretched too far and folded too often by a man who loved her once, but now only possessed her. Her husband, Wade Harlan, 38, sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly out the window. A former Army staff sergeant, Wade had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. When Eliza first met him at a charity art auction in Little Rock, he had been all broad shoulders and warm hands, with a laugh that made people turn and smile. His hair was once sun-bleached and thick. Now it was buzzed short, graying at the temples, and often unwashed. He had a square jaw, but the tight clenching of it had become a fixture, as if he was always bracing for something. The war had carved things into Wade's mind that no peace could smooth over. PTSD ruled his nights. Loud, thrashing dreams of explosions, shouting commands in languages Eliza didn't understand, and waking up in cold, choking gasps. The days weren't much better. He walked like someone expecting a fight, tense in every step. Paranoia had become routine, and so had his suspicion. "Did you call someone?" Wade asked, eyes not leaving the window. His voice was low, tight. Eliza paused by the sink, fingers frozen around a cracked ceramic mug. "No," she said gently. "No one's called in days." He stood, pacing now. "You're lying. I heard the phone. Or did you write to someone? Are you still drawing them pictures, huh?" There was no point in denying things when he spiraled like this. She knew that tone. It was the same one he used the first time he'd taken the old military belt from its hook by the door. The one with faded initials etched into the leather and the metal buckle worn from desert heat and repetition. "You think I don't know what you're doing," he muttered, now gripping the belt loosely in one hand, as if it were a natural extension of himself. "Every smile you give the grocery boy, every damn wave to the propane guy, that's betrayal." "I don't wave," she said, heart pounding. "You did. That day last month." Eliza's body was always alert now, finely tuned to his moods. She kept her movements slow, her gaze down, never defiant. Yet even submission didn't guarantee safety anymore. He stepped closer. "I told you," he whispered, voice trembling. "I told you not to make me do this. But you never listen." The first strike never made a sound. It was a sickening thud, followed by the hiss of Eliza's breath as pain bloomed across her shoulder. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor silently. She had learned not to cry. Crying only escalated things. Wade hated tears, said they reminded him of the locals who screamed after drone strikes. "Clean it up," he said, throwing the mug she had dropped into the sink with a loud clatter. "And stop drawing. I see those damn sketches." He didn't mention where she drew them. He hadn't found out yet. Only in the bathroom, late at night while he slept in tortured dreams, did Eliza dare take out the smallest stub of pencil she had hidden behind the radiator. She drew with the bathroom fan running, her paper resting on the lid of the toilet seat, Wildflowers, she remembered, a child's face in town, and once when she was feeling brave, the shape of a horse. Thunder. That was the name of her Mustang. Not many people in Pine Bluff kept Mustangs. But Thunder wasn't just any horse. He had been a gift from her uncle when she turned 18. A strong, broad-shouldered stallion with a slate gray coat and a white blaze down his nose. His eyes were sharp and unusually expressive, and over the years he had come to know Eliza's moods even before she spoke. Now 10 years old, Thunder lived in a dilapidated stable just behind the house. Wade had tried to sell him once, called him a luxury we can't afford, but Eliza had pleaded, tears in her eyes, not for herself but for the horse. Wade relented that time, barely. She hadn't ridden Thunder in nearly 6 months. Wade didn't allow it anymore. He said she needed to stay close to the house where he could keep her safe. But every time she stepped outside to feed him, Thunder would nuzzle her face gently, as if saying, "I see you, I haven't forgotten you." He hadn't, and neither had she. Back inside the cabin, Eliza sat on the cold floor long after Wade had left the room, the sting on her skin slowly fading into numbness. She pressed her palm to the bruised spot on her shoulder and then brought her hand to her mouth, silencing herself. If she were stronger, maybe she'd leave. Maybe she'd fight back. But this forest had no neighbors. The nearest paved road was 8 miles down a dirt trail, no cell reception, no visitors, just the sound of pine needles rustling in the wind, the creaking of the roof overhead, and the quiet sobs of a woman who had once painted murals of open skies. But a storm was coming. She could feel it in the shift of the wind, and in the heavy, quiet breath of a Mustang who still watched her from the shadows. The wind had shifted by afternoon, turning colder, sharper, rustling through the pine branches like dry paper. The clouds remained, thick and unmoving, casting a dull pallor over the clearing that surrounded the Harlan cabin. The stench of damp moss and the faint sweetness of decaying pine needles hung heavy in the air, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Behind the house, a narrow path curved toward a sagging structure barely held upright by time and rusted nails. A horse stable once painted red, now faded to a sun-bleached rosewood. This was Thunder's world, a quiet, half-rotten place of straw, shadow, and memory. Eliza stood at the edge of the wooden doorway, her arms wrapped around herself as though shielding her body from the chill or the guilt. She watched as Thunder, now 10 years old, lifted his massive head from the hay. He was a breathtaking animal, broad-necked and thick-chested, with a slate-gray coat that shimmered faintly even under a dreary sky. His mane was long and slightly tangled, black streaked with silver, and his intelligent eyes bore a depth that often unsettled strangers but comforted Eliza. Thunder had been with her since her 18th birthday, a gift from her Uncle Royce, a stubborn rancher who had taught her to ride bareback before she could parallel park. Royce had died 3 winters later from a tractor accident, but his legacy remained in the form of this wild, patient Mustang who never fully lost his untamed spark. Eliza stepped closer and placed her hand gently on Thunder's neck. He nickered, a low rumble from his throat, and pressed his muzzle into her shoulder. The warmth of him settled her nerves, and for a moment she allowed herself to close her eyes and breathe him in. Dust, leather, and hay. "You're the only thing that still feels real," she whispered. "The only thing that hasn't changed." In her hand was a piece of bruised apple, the last one she had managed to hide from Wade's inventory of the pantry. Thunder took it gently, his breath warm against her palm. From inside the cabin, Wade's voice echoed faintly. He was on the phone again, likely with one of his old army buddies. Men Eliza had never met but whose names she remembered. Miles, who'd lost a leg, Jackson, who drank even more than Wade, and Briggs, who had disappeared into the Colorado wilderness 2 years ago and never returned. Eliza had learned to listen to Wade's tone more than his words. Today, his voice was tired, distracted. That gave her a sliver of time. She leaned her forehead against Thunder's and whispered, "Remember that time in the orchard? When I screamed and you came charging like a storm?" She smiled briefly at the memory. She'd been 16 and barefoot, running through her uncle's orchard in the Ozarks, when a cottonmouth had slithered up from the creek and reared near her ankle. Thunder, still a young colt then, had barreled from the fence line, reared up, and stomped so close to the snake that it slithered off in defeat. Since then, Eliza believed he understood her fear in a way no human ever had. She looked toward the edge of the woods. The trees were thick, tangled with vines and wild briar. It wasn't a path, nothing more than an imagined escape. She had thought about it, of course, about climbing on Thunder and galloping into the forest, disappearing beyond Wade's reach. But it was only ever a thought. No maps, no money, no real plan. Just the kind of desperate longing people carried but never acted on. Still, today something shifted. Maybe it was the apple. Maybe it was the fresh bruise blooming under her sweater. Or maybe it was the way Thunder looked at her now, not as a pet might, but as a partner waiting for a signal. Eliza. The voice wasn't Wade's. She turned sharply. A figure was approaching the fence line that separated their property from the forest trail. A woman in her mid-50s, wrapped in a flannel coat and scarf, with a canvas satchel slung across her shoulder. Her name was Miriam Kettle, the nearest thing Eliza had to a neighbor. Miriam lived 3 miles down the gravel road in a house built entirely of reclaimed barnwood. She was stout, with weathered hands and sharp green eyes, the kind that missed nothing. Her short graying hair was pulled back into a bandana, and her voice always had a dry rasp to it, like she'd spent years talking over roaring engines. "Didn't mean to startle," Miriam said, lifting her hand in a cautious wave. Eliza instinctively took a step back from Thunder. "Hi, Miriam." Wade's inside." Miriam nodded slowly but didn't approach the house. She'd learned the unspoken rules. "Just out checking the creek level," she said casually. "Storm's coming. Could get nasty." Eliza nodded. "Thanks for letting me know." They stood in silence for a beat too long. Miriam's eyes flicked toward the bruise just barely visible on Eliza's collarbone, and then quickly away. "I'll be going," Miriam said finally, turning back toward the trail. "Just, if you need anything, that old lantern on the fence post, I leave it lit when it's safe to come by." Eliza's breath caught. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged what she couldn't say aloud. She gave a barely perceptible nod. Miriam disappeared into the woods like a ghost. Back in the stable, Thunder pawed the ground restlessly. Eliza traced her fingers along his mane. She could hear Wade's voice rise again through the cabin walls, sharp, cutting. "Someday," she murmured, more to herself than to the horse. "Someday we'll go. Just you and me." Thunder's ears flicked forward. The storm came in without warning, a brutal assault from the heavens that turned the Pine Bluff woods into a theater of chaos. Rain hurled itself against the wooden cabin with wild force, drumming on the tin roof like war drums. Wind shrieked through the trees, rattling window panes and bending pines until their trunks groaned. The sky, a deep indigo, cracked again and again with flashes of white lightning that seemed to claw at the ground itself. Eliza stood in the kitchen, with her arms folded tightly against her chest. She had lit a candle after the power had cut out an hour ago. The flickering light cast shadows that danced across the cabin walls. The radio had warned of tornadic activity in Jefferson County, and now the outside world sounded like it was being torn in half. But Eliza knew better than to fear the storm. She feared the man stumbling up the porch steps, slamming into the doorframe like a wrecking ball. Wade burst in, soaked in rain and reeking of whiskey. His boots squelched on the warped floorboards as he kicked the door shut behind him. Water streamed from his army surplus coat, plastering it to his shoulders. His eyes, usually shadowed and tense, were now wide and electric, frenzied. "Why'd you smile at him?" he barked before she could say a word. His voice was thick, like it had to wade through alcohol before it escaped his throat. "You think I didn't notice? The boy at the gas station. You grinned like he was your damn soulmate." Eliza froze, trying to keep her expression calm. "I thanked him. That's all. He handed me the receipt. I smiled." "You don't smile at strangers," Wade growled. "You don't look at them like that unless you want something." He dropped the whiskey bottle onto the kitchen table. It rolled, clinking, before settling against a canister of flour. Then he grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron. She tried to pull back, but he shoved her roughly against the table. "You forgot how to be quiet," he said, his face inches from hers, hot breath laced with bitterness. "Maybe it's time you remembered." With a sudden movement, he reached for the wall where his belt hung on a rusted nail. The same belt that had once kept young soldiers in line. Now it was his gavel, his law. "Wade, please," Eliza whispered. "There's a storm." "There's always a storm," he spat, "but this one's on you." He shoved the table aside, its legs scraping against the wood. The belt unfurled in his hand like a whip. Eliza stumbled back, but he caught her, dragging her forward. With a twisted laugh, he kicked over a chair and forced her across the table, her palms splaying over its surface. With one hand, he pinned her shoulder. With the other, he drew back the belt. Then came the sound, not from the wind or the thunder, but from outside. A piercing scream that cut through the storm like a blade. A horse's cry. Thunders. Wade froze mid-motion. Another wail followed, urgent, guttural, defiant. In the next flash of lightning, Eliza caught a glimpse through the side window. The stable door was swinging wildly. Thunder's silhouette reared against the storm, hooves flailing. Another strike of lightning hit the yard, illuminating Thunder's eyes, wild and burning with something almost human. "What the hell?" Wade muttered, releasing her. The belt dropped to the floor. Before either of them could react, a tremendous crash came from the back of the cabin. The stable door had splintered off its hinges, flung by a mix of hooves and storm, and then came the thundering hoofbeats. Thunder charged. The front door burst open in a hail of rain and flying debris. Thunder's massive form crashed through, nostrils flared, soaked mane whipping like a flag of war. The storm seemed to follow him, wind screaming through the open cabin, scattering papers, knocking over chairs. "Jesus!" Wade stumbled back. Eliza dropped to the floor, scrambling away. Thunder reared with a deafening whinny, his front hooves lashing the air. Wade tried to raise his hands in defense, but the horse struck first, his right hoof catching Wade in the chest, sending him sprawling into a bookshelf. Paperbacks rained down, a photograph frame shattered on the floor. Wade gasped, coughing, trying to rise. Get that beast out of here." But Thunder stepped forward, massive and unmoving, placing himself between Wade and Eliza like a stone wall. The storm howled behind him. Wade reached for a fire poker lying near the hearth, his body heaving with rage. He swung. Thunder dodged, sidestepped, and let out a shriek that echoed with fury. The second hoof struck Wade's leg. He collapsed, cursing, clutching his knee. Eliza pulled herself upright, blood pounding in her ears. She crawled to Thunder's side, her fingers gripping his damp mane. "Go," she whispered. He seemed to understand. Eliza grabbed the discarded blanket near the door and flung it around her shoulders. Thunder turned, backing toward the door. Rain lashed their faces. Eliza glanced back at Wade one last time. Curled on the floor, groaning in pain, eyes wide with disbelief. Lightning lit his face. He looked like a man drowning in his own madness. And then she ran. Barefoot, soaked, cold to her bones, she clung to Thunder's side as they barreled into the storm. The trees ahead were black, shifting shadows, but they were open, free. The storm may have been born in heaven, but it was Thunder who delivered her from hell. The rain had not let up. It fell in sheets now, slapping the canopy overhead, crashing against soaked branches and pooling into rivulets along the forest floor. The woods outside Pine Bluff had become a labyrinth of shadow and noise, deafening in their isolation, terrifying in their expanse. Eliza May clung to Thunder's soaked mane with everything she had left. Her thighs gripped his flanks, her back aflame with pain from where the belt had landed. The blood from her lashes had mixed with the rain, running warm and red into the coarse black and silver hairs of Thunder's neck. Thunder ran as though possessed. Each powerful stride ate up the trail, his hooves splashing into muddy puddles, then launching over fallen logs with the ease of memory. He knew this terrain, not because she had shown it to him, but because the wild lived in his bones. The way he shifted through the trees, choosing the safest footing, even in the dark, made Eliza feel for the first time like she wasn't leading this escape. Thunder was. Branches tore at her blanket and scratched her cheeks. Her nightgown, once white, now clung to her skin in heavy clumps, dark with water and blood. Every jolt of Thunder's movement sent fire through her ribs, but she dared not cry out. If Wade had gotten to the Jeep, if he had any clue where she'd gone, every sound she made could shorten the space between them. Thunder veered left, skirting the edge of a ravine swollen with floodwater. Lightning flashed, revealing the glint of the current far below. Eliza squeezed her eyes shut. The world spun with every hoofbeat, but she couldn't stop now. Couldn't fall. If she did, she wouldn't get back up. A burst of thunder cracked above them, and for a moment the entire forest lit up. In that breathless second, Eliza saw something that made her heart twist. An old hunter's post, long abandoned, its wooden structure half collapsed but standing enough to suggest civilization had once passed this way. She knew this wasn't safety. It was a marker. A reminder that even deep in the woods, she wasn't the first to run. Thunder slowed as the ground leveled. A narrow game trail opened before them, tight, overgrown, flanked by cedar and pine. Eliza blinked rain from her lashes. Her hands were trembling. Her fingers, stiff with cold and fear, slipped from Thunder's mane. Then her body gave out. She slid sideways off Thunder's back, landing hard on the wet earth. Her cry was soft, more breath than sound. She curled onto her side, arms wrapped around her ribs. The pain was immediate and electric, a reminder of the lashes, of the fall, of the fact that she was still alive. Thunder circled back immediately, snorting and stamping beside her. His large head lowered, nudging her gently. Eliza reached up with effort, running her hand along his wet jaw. "I'm okay," she murmured, though it was a lie. She wasn't okay. She was broken and lost and bleeding into the mud of a forest she couldn't navigate. She rolled onto her back, panting. The rain continued to fall. Somewhere above, an owl screeched, a long, eerie cry that echoed over the trees. A flicker of warmth touched her memory. Wade, younger, before the shadows claimed him. He'd stood barefoot in their kitchen one summer, holding a steaming mug of coffee, smiling as the morning sun lit his face. He had been kind then, gentle. His voice used to soothe her. He used to brush her hair behind her ear and say, "You make the quiet feel like home." Eliza flinched. The image dissolved. That man was gone. The weight of now didn't offer warmth. He devoured it. Whatever goodness he once held had been swallowed by fear, by rage, by the ghosts of war he refused to acknowledge. She closed her eyes. The rain beat down harder. Thunder lowered his body beside her, lying in the mud as though offering his warmth. She curled toward him, laying her cheek against his soaked flank. His heart thudded beneath her ear, slow and steady, grounding her in the here and now. The pain in her back had grown numb, dulled by shock and cold, but her mind remained alert. She had no map, no supplies, no way to call for help, only thunder. And still, she was freer than she had been in years. A rustling sound from the trees made Thunder lift his head sharply. His ears flicked. Eliza tensed, but the sound faded, replaced by the distant groan of the storm winding westward. They were alone, for now. The trail ahead dipped into a thicket. A faint glimmer of silver showed where water cut through the land, a creek maybe, or runoff from the storm. Eliza tried to push herself upright. Her limbs trembled. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. Thunder rose first, then slowly, painfully, she rose too. She gripped his mane, steadied herself, and began to walk. 10 feet, 20, 40. A bend in the path opened to a narrow clearing, and there, barely visible in the darkness, was an old stone mile marker. Cracked, moss-covered, half-buried. She could follow it. She didn't know where it led, but anywhere was better than behind. The gravel bit into Eliza's knees as she collapsed by the side of the narrow country road, her limbs trembling uncontrollably from the effort of staying upright for so long. Her back throbbed. Her nightgown was soaked and clinging to her skin, and her breath came in short, ragged gasps. Thunder stood beside her, massive and unmoving, the rain beating on his coat, his breath steady, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond the road. In the near distance, twin beams of light approached slowly, the hum of an old truck engine cutting through the howl of the wind. Eliza could barely lift her hand, her voice caught somewhere between a sob and a whisper. "Help, please." The truck screeched to a stop a few yards away. A door slammed. Heavy boots crunched toward her, splashing through puddles. Then came a woman's voice, firm, quick, the tone of someone used to urgency. "Oh, sweet Jesus." The woman dropped to her knees beside Eliza, a coat thrown over her shivering shoulders with practiced hands. "Stay with me, honey. I've got you." Martha Ray was a retired VA nurse in her early 60s, stocky with strong arms and a presence that didn't allow fear to linger. Her salt and pepper hair was tied into a loose bun, and her face, weathered from decades of long shifts and loss, carried the calm of someone who had seen far worse and survived it. Her raincoat soaked within seconds, but she didn't seem to care. She turned and blinked at the black horse towering nearby. "You brought her here?" she murmured. Thunder, as if understanding, gave a soft nicker. "Good boy," she added, eyes narrowing with recognition. A Mustang? No bridle, no saddle? You chose to follow her, didn't you? With surprising strength, Martha helped Eliza stand, her own body shielding the girl from the worst of the rain. Eliza cried out softly, her legs buckling. Easy now, Martha said, easing her toward the truck. We'll get you both somewhere dry. The truck's back gate opened, revealing a makeshift ramp. Thunder hesitated only briefly before stepping up, obediently walking into the trailer bed like he'd done it 100 times. Martha secured the ramp, then turned to Eliza, whose face was pale and eyes barely open. You'll be all right now, sweetheart. My name's Martha. You're safe. The truck rumbled back into motion, tires hissing over wet gravel. Eliza, swaddled in flannel blankets, dozed in and out of consciousness. Rain pelted the windows. Martha glanced over between turns. You don't have to talk, she said softly. But I've seen those bruises before, and I've seen the fear behind your eyes. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter. I've known too many soldiers who came back from war, only to bring the battlefield home with them. They turned off the main road after a few miles, following a narrow path flanked by overgrown weeds and broken fencing. A dilapidated barn stood ahead, its silhouette just visible through the storm. The house that once sat beside it had collapsed years ago, but the barn, though sagging, remained mostly intact. This used to belong to my friend Millie, Martha explained. She passed a while back. No one's touched the place since, but it's dry, and no one knows about it. She pulled the truck to a stop and opened the door. The rain had lessened but hadn't stopped. She moved quickly, opening the barn doors, then guided Thunder inside first, patting his flank gently. Strong boy, she whispered, keep guarding her. Next, she returned for Eliza, who struggled to stand. I'm okay, Eliza whispered, but her voice cracked. I can walk. Martha helped her inside without a word. The barn was dusty, the floor covered in old straw and scattered tools, but it was dry and smelled of time and earth. Martha laid down thick blankets in a corner, lit a lantern from her bag, and helped Eliza sit. Thunder stood no more than 2 steps away, ears flicked forward, tail swishing softly. Eliza pulled the blanket tighter around herself and stared into the flickering light. Her lips trembled, but no words came. Martha didn't push. She knelt instead by a battered toolbox and pulled out a thermos. Tea. Chamomile. It'll help with the shock. Minutes passed. The storm outside seemed farther now. The barn creaked gently with the wind, but it was the kind of creaking that felt natural, like the world exhaling. Finally, Eliza spoke. Her voice was hoarse. He used to be kind. Martha sat beside her, hands clasped in her lap. Tell me. And Eliza did. Between choked breaths and flinches of pain, she told Martha about Wade. How they had met, how he had once been the kind of man who opened doors and made her laugh until she cried. About the war. About the change. About the belt. Her voice broke when she described how he whispered to ghosts at night, how he saw betrayal in every smile she gave someone else. When she finished, her face was streaked with tears. I didn't know where else to go. I just ran. Martha took her hand, warm and steady. You don't need to explain. You did the bravest thing anyone in your shoes could do. You chose to live. Eliza broke then, not into sobs, but a silent collapse of breath and body, leaning into the older woman's shoulder, unable to form words. Thunder stepped closer, gently lowering his head until it rested against her arm. Martha didn't say another word. She simply sat with her, letting the silence be enough. The forest lay cloaked in mist and silence, save for the distant mechanical growl of a Jeep engine, weaving its way through the dark Arkansas backroads. Thunder's ears twitched at every distant rumble, and Eliza, huddled beside his flank deep inside the shadowed barn, felt her pulse match the rhythm of the looming sound. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might give her away. She pressed her cheek against Thunder's muscular shoulder, his body warm despite the dampness clinging to everything. His breath was steady, anchoring her as panic danced at the edges of her mind. Farther down the muddy trail, a different scene unfolded. Martha Ray, dressed in a thick canvas jacket and her hair tied tight, gripped the wheel of her old farm truck with quiet focus. The narrow road ahead was barely visible beneath the flickering headlights. She knew these fields like the lines of her own palm, and she was counting on that fact. Behind her, through the cracked side mirror, a pair of headlights swayed wildly. Wade Harlan was gaining. Wade's Jeep roared forward, tires spitting gravel, windshield fogged by a mixture of sweat and smeared rain. His knuckles were white against the wheel, his eyes bloodshot, narrowed with rage. He hadn't slept since Eliza vanished. He'd awakened in the cabin, the belt still clutched in his hand and the door blown open. Shadow was gone. Eliza was gone, only the howling wind remained, and he knew someone had taken her. Someone had interfered. When he saw the muddy hoofprints and tire tracks leading away from the property, his mind snapped into combat mode. Hunt, pursue, take back what was his. Inside the barn, Eliza lifted her head slightly. Thunder stood like a stone guardian between her and the door, his body still and focused. She whispered, "Do you hear it too?" The horse gave a soft huff in response. Her fingers tightened around his mane. In the flickering lantern light, her face appeared drawn but calm. She had made her choice. No matter what came through that door, she would not return to Wade. Martha's truck veered left, splashing through a low ravine. Behind her, Wade struggled to keep up. His Jeep skidded on the slick mud and fishtailed into a tangle of shrubs. He cursed, jerking the wheel, heart hammering. "You can't outrun me," he muttered, slamming the accelerator. "You're just some old woman." But Martha had no intention of outrunning him. She had another plan. Several miles ahead, a state highway checkpoint had been established temporarily due to storm damage. She'd seen the lights earlier in the day, officers waving drivers through, inspecting for road safety. She was banking everything on reaching that point, with Wade still on her tail. Back in the barn, Eliza moved slowly, checking the chain on the barn door for the third time. It wasn't much, just a rusted loop and an old iron bolt, but for now, it was a barrier. Thunder watched her following each movement. She knelt beside him again, voice low, steady despite the fear. "I think she's leading him away. Martha's smart, smarter than he'll ever be." The sound of the Jeep engine now drifted farther away. Eliza exhaled, for the first time letting her body sag against the straw. Thunder curled his neck toward her, as if sensing her exhaustion. She reached out, wrapped her arms around his broad neck, and whispered, "Thank you." Then, curling against his side, she finally closed her eyes. Martha, meanwhile, saw the glow of the checkpoint up ahead, red and blue lights flashing faintly through the drizzle. A pair of officers stood under a makeshift canopy, their reflective jackets like beacons in the dark. Martha pressed the gas a little harder, her plan solidifying in the moment. She turned sharply onto the final approach, slowing just enough to make it seem routine. Behind her, the Jeep rounded the bend too fast, barely managing to stay on the road. The officers straightened as both vehicles approached. One of them, Officer Darnell Boyd, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a quiet, no-nonsense demeanor, raised his flashlight. The second officer, Sarah Vega, shorter but sharp-eyed and vigilant, stepped forward with her hand near her belt. Martha rolled down her window. "Evening, officers. There's a man in that Jeep behind me. He's drunk, furious, and chasing me. He's armed, or at least he was. You'll want to stop him before someone gets hurt." Darnell nodded, already turning toward the Jeep. Sarah moved to the rear, her eyes narrowing as Wade's vehicle jerked to a stop behind the truck. The door flew open. Wade staggered out, soaked and enraged. "Where is she?" he shouted, pointing at Martha. "That woman. She took my wife." Darnell's voice was calm but authoritative. "Sir, we need you to step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Wade's eyes darted between them. "You don't understand. My wife's in danger. That damn horse, he took her." Sarah's voice cut through like steel. "You've been drinking, sir?" Wade tried to wave it off. "It's nothing, just whiskey. Just to keep me steady." Darnell stepped forward. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle." Wade resisted. "You're not listening to me." It didn't matter. Within seconds, both officers had him restrained, cuffed, and searched. The Jeep reeked of alcohol. In the back seat, they found a discarded belt, stained, worn, and wrapped like a weapon. Sarah raised her brow as she held it up. "Discipline tool?" she muttered. Wade shouted as they guided him toward the cruiser. "You'll regret this. She's my wife." Martha leaned against the truck door, hands still shaking slightly. But when she saw the cruiser doors close behind Wade and the lights turn toward the precinct, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Later that night, back at the barn, Eliza stirred. The storm had passed. Thunder stood like a statue, one leg bent, ears relaxed. She opened her eyes slowly, For the first time in what felt like years, no shouting, no boots stomping, no belt snapping through the air. Just the soft rhythm of the horse's breathing and the rustle of wind outside. She buried her face against Thunder's neck and whispered, "We made it through the night." The early morning air in Little Rock was crisp, tinged with the dry chill of late autumn. A pale sun filtered through high courthouse windows, casting long golden streaks across the marble floor. Eliza May Harlan sat quietly in the hallway, her hands folded in her lap, her heart thudding beneath a borrowed navy blouse. It wasn't elegant, but it was clean, pressed, and simple, exactly how she wanted to present herself. She wore no makeup, her auburn hair pulled into a low bun. Beside her sat Martha Ray, calm as ever, her aging fingers gently wrapped around Eliza's. The retired nurse wore a thick gray cardigan and a wide-brimmed brown felt hat, her presence as grounding as a century-old oak. When the court officer finally called them in, Eliza rose with careful resolve. Her legs trembled beneath her modest skirt, but she took a steadying breath and entered the courtroom. The space was solemn and grand, lined with dark wood paneling and leather-bound law books behind the judge's bench. A modest number of people sat on the benches, reporters, clerks, and a few unfamiliar faces, but Eliza's eyes locked only on one figure, Wade. He sat across the aisle in a faded orange jumpsuit, his wrists bound in cuffs, his eyes fixed somewhere on the floor. He looked thinner, his military haircut grown ragged, with deep shadows carved beneath his cheekbones. When Eliza stepped inside, Wade didn't look up. Judge Annabelle Mercer presided. In her early 50s, Judge Mercer had a reputation for being sharp, fair, and unshakably calm. With ash blonde hair clipped short and reading glasses perched on her nose, she glanced at her docket and then over at Eliza. "You may take the stand, Miss Harlan," the judge instructed. Eliza approached slowly. She swore the oath, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear. When asked to recount the events, she began, not with tears or trembling, but with quiet determination. She told of the early days in Pine Bluff, of Wade's kindness, how the war had carved into him like slow poison, how nightmares became control, and control became violence. She didn't embellish, she didn't sensationalize, she simply told the truth. "I didn't run because I stopped loving him," she said. "I ran because I realized love wasn't enough to fix someone who didn't want to be helped." A hush fell over the room. The prosecutor, a tall, composed woman named Denise Keller, nodded respectfully. Denise was in her early 40s, dark-skinned, with short, coiled hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had handled many domestic abuse cases, but admitted in private to Martha that this one haunted her more than most. After Eliza finished her testimony, Denise addressed the court, requesting the maximum allowed sentence, but acknowledged Wade's condition. Wade's court-appointed defense attorney, Thomas Breen, was a wiry, bespectacled man in his late 50s. He didn't argue against the facts. Instead, he asked the court for understanding. "Mr. Harlan is a decorated Marine," he said, voice even. "What he did was indefensible. But context matters. He returned from Afghanistan with severe untreated PTSD. Isolation only made it worse." Then came the court psychologist, Dr. Lena Hartwell, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and a clipboard always within arm's reach. She had evaluated Wade in the days after his arrest. "Mr. Harlan shows clear signs of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, paranoia, hypervigilance, dissociation. His military service placed him in repeated life-or-death situations. Unfortunately, he refused help for years. Alcohol became a crutch, anger, a shield." Judge Mercer listened intently. Then she turned to Eliza. "Do you wish to address the court one final time before I deliver sentencing?" Eliza stood, unsure of what to say. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice held. "I don't want revenge," she began. "I want safety. I want peace. I want him to get help, but not at the cost of my freedom ever again. I hope one day he finds healing, but I will never go back. Never." She returned to her seat. Martha squeezed her hand, tears quietly lining the older woman's eyes. The judge paused, as if weighing something deeply personal. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Harlan," she said, "this court recognizes your service and the burdens you carry, but service does not excuse violence. You terrorized your wife, you denied her safety, and for that you must be held accountable." A quiet shift fell across the courtroom. Wade finally looked up. His expression was blank, almost detached, but his eyes met Eliza's, just for a heartbeat. "I sentence you to 3 years in state prison," the judge said, "with a mandatory enrollment in a psychiatric rehabilitation program for combat veterans suffering from PTSD. Should you show meaningful improvement after 18 months, you may apply for conditional release." Wade gave no protest, no outburst. He lowered his head, lips pressed in a thin line, and let the officers lead him away. Eliza watched him disappear through the side doors, her chest tight, not with rage, but something heavier, grief for the man she once knew, and the man he had become. After the proceedings, as reporters filed their notes and court staff gathered papers, Eliza remained seated. Only when Martha helped her to her feet did she realize her knees had locked from the tension. "You were brave," Martha whispered. "You did more than survive, you told the truth." Outside the courthouse, the sunlight had warmed slightly, scattering across the stone steps. Eliza paused, her eyes lifted to the soft blue sky, her lungs finally drawing in a breath that felt clean, free. She would go back to the farmhouse in Forest City, back to Thunder, back to a new beginning. The sky over Jonesboro stretched wide and blue, brushed with wisps of early morning clouds. A cool breeze skimmed across the grass, lifting the scent of dew and earth. The small white farmhouse on the edge of the county road stood modest but proud, its paint newly freshened by Eliza May Harlan's own hand. The wooden porch creaked gently as she stepped out barefoot, a steaming cup of coffee nestled between her palms, her breath still visible in the crisp fall air. It had been 3 months since the courtroom, 3 months since she returned not to her past, but to a blank canvas waiting to be painted in peace. Her body had healed faster than her soul, but each sunrise in this new space, her space, was an act of defiance against the silence that once imprisoned her. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, with a slanted tin roof and a garden that hadn't bloomed in years. But it stood on 5 acres of open land, fenced with old cedar posts, and behind it lay a sturdy red barn that now belonged to Thunder. The Mustang had adapted quickly to his new surroundings, claiming the field as his own. His smoky gray coat shimmered in the morning sun, and his gait was proud and steady, as if he understood that his role had changed, from protector to partner in recovery. Thunder was now 10 years old. His broad chest and thick mane gave him a noble silhouette, but it was his eyes, sharp, intelligent, full of quiet fire, that made him the centerpiece of this reborn world. Local children loved to watch him gallop freely along the fence, his hooves thundering over soft soil. Eliza often joked with the neighbors that he had a better social life than she did. The neighborhood was modest and kind. Folks kept to themselves, but waved when they passed. There was a widower named George Langston, 2 houses down, who always left a basket of tomatoes on her porch. In his early 70s, George was wiry, with calloused hands and a soft Arkansas drawl. "Good fences and good horses," he'd once said with a nod, "make for strong hearts." Eliza had smiled, unsure whether he meant literal fences or emotional ones. Then there was Sarah Klein, who lived across the road. Sarah was in her late 30s, lean and tall, with long blonde hair she wore in a braid down her back. A high school history teacher, she had an air of calm authority, a quiet patience that made people instinctively trust her. Sarah had lost her sister to domestic violence years earlier, an event that made her fiercely protective of anyone showing signs of hurt. She never pushed Eliza to talk, but was always there, a quiet presence who brought muffins and warm silence. On Mondays and Thursdays, Eliza volunteered at the Willow Haven Center for Domestic Renewal. She started by shelving books and organizing donation bins, but after a month, the director, Clarence Moore, a stocky, kind-eyed man with salt and pepper hair, invited her to help lead a peer support circle. Clarence had been with the center for over a decade, and he saw in Eliza something unshaken. "You don't speak from textbooks," he told her. "You speak from storms." Eliza hesitated at first. Sharing her story felt like reopening wounds, but she found that each time she spoke, her voice trembled less. She wasn't just recounting survival, she was offering others a way through. Back at the farmhouse, she began keeping a journal. At first, it was just lists of tasks: fix the porch rail, weed the garden, patch the shed roof. Then it became deeper. Paragraphs turned into reflections, and reflections turned into chapters. She wrote of Thunder's loyalty, of the night he kicked open the door and charged into the cabin like a living symbol of justice. She wrote about the pain, the courtroom, and the weight of learning that healing wasn't a straight road. It twisted like the forest trails she'd once escaped into. Each entry ended with a small affirmation. I am here, I am safe, I am more than what happened to me. Thunder remained her sentinel. Every night before bed, Eliza walked out to the barn in her flannel robe and slippers, carrying a handful of oats. Thunder would nuzzle her shoulder, his warm breath calming. One evening, after reading a letter from the state confirming that Wade had started his PTSD program, she leaned into Thunder's neck and whispered, "Freedom isn't running away, it's daring to keep living." A single tear slid down her cheek. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. More like the soft ache of remembering who she used to be. The nightmares came less often now. At first, every slammed door made her flinch. Every unfamiliar car down the road made her heart race. But time, routine, and a small brass bell by the front door reminded her she was no longer trapped. When she heard the creak of a floorboard, it was just the house settling, not footsteps filled with anger. One cold morning, a letter arrived. Handwritten, postmarked from the correctional center. It was from Wade, short, careful, and signed only with his initials. He wrote that he was sorry, not for getting caught, but for who he had become. He said he was trying to change, that the nightmares still haunted him, but he no longer denied their power. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only asked that she continue forward. Eliza folded the letter and placed it between 2 pages of her journal. She didn't know if she'd ever respond. But knowing he finally saw the truth brought a strange, unexpected sense of closure. Later that afternoon, she sat on the porch watching Thunder graze. In her lap was a notebook filled with entries and outlines. She was thinking of compiling them into something more. Perhaps a book or a series of essays for women like her. Not a manifesto. Just a beacon for the lost. Martha visited often. The older woman's health had grown more fragile, but her spirit remained indomitable. They would sit under the oak tree, sipping sweet tea and listening to cicadas. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they just sat. Martha would smile, point her cane at Thunder, and say, "That horse was sent by God, I swear it." Eliza no longer tried to explain how Thunder knew to break in that night. Some things defy logic. She didn't need a reason, only the truth of what he had done. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting golden streaks over the field. Eliza rose, brushing crumbs from her jeans. As Thunder ambled toward her, she laughed softly, resting a hand on his forehead. "We're gonna be just fine, aren't we?" she murmured. Thunder responded with a quiet huff and a toss of his head, as if to say, "You already are." Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or shining lights. They come in the form of a loyal horse, a kind stranger, or the strength to take one more step when everything hurts. Eliza's journey reminds us that even in our darkest nights, God never stops watching over us. His grace can appear in the most unexpected ways, guiding us through storms we never thought we'd survive. If you've ever felt trapped, forgotten, or broken, know this: healing is real, freedom is possible, and your story is not over. Keep going, keep believing, and never underestimate the quiet ways God may be working in your life. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and help us spread stories that uplift and inspire. And if you believe in the power of God's protection and second chances, type Amen in the comments and join us in prayer for His continued blessings over all who are still waiting for their own miracle.